She knelt before a court that never deserved her loyalty. 7 years of silence, 7 years of swallowing poison with a smile, and they called it devotion. But the woman who rose from that bow was not the same woman who lowered her head. She was something older, something the Silver Fang Kingdom had forgotten existed. This is the story of how one discarded Luna burned an empire to the ground, not with fire, but with the truth they tried to bury with her. Stay until the very end, hit that like button, and drop the name of your city in the comments. Let me see where the pack is watching from tonight. The marble was cold against her knees. That was the detail Serena Vale would remember longest. Not the laughter, not the whispers snaking through the crowd like smoke through cracked stone, but the way the floor bit into her skin through the thin fabric of her ceremonial gown. Cold enough to remind her she still had a body. Cold enough to tell her the body still registered pain. The Winter Summit had drawn every alpha of consequence to the Silver Fang Kingdom's great hall. 300 wolves packed the gallery, their breath fogging in the frigid air because Darius always refused to heat the hall during formal assemblies. He said the cold kept wolves honest. Serena had once believed that. She had believed most things he told her, back when believing was easier than looking. The hall stretched long and severe, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Iron chandeliers hung on chains thick as a man's wrist, their candles guttering against drafts that whistled through stone joints older than the kingdom itself. Banners of every sworn pack lined the walls. The Red Hollow, the Ashwood, the Northern Ridge, the Blackmere, all of them watching. All of them silent. Lyra Ashbourne stood 3 steps above Serena on the raised dais, wearing a gown the color of arterial blood. Her dark hair was braided with silver thread that caught the candlelight and threw it back like tiny blades. She was not the Luna. She had never been the Luna. But she stood where the Luna should stand, and no one in the hall corrected her. "Lower," Lyra said. The word dropped like a stone into water. Serena heard the ripple of it pass through the crowd, the intake of breath, the shuffle of boots, the creak of leather as wolves shifted their weight but did not move. Serena's fingers pressed flat against the marble. Her arms trembled, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding still when every instinct in her screamed to lunge. "I said lower, Serena." Darius sat on the throne behind Lyra, one leg crossed over the other, his jaw working on something. A piece of dried meat, maybe, or the inside of his cheek. His eyes were on the middle distance, fixed on nothing. He did not look at Serena. He had stopped looking at her 3 years ago. She bent forward another inch. The crowd exhaled. Commander Ronan, head of the King's Guard, stood at the base of the dais with his hand on the pommel of his sword. His face was carved from the same stone as the walls. Expressionless, dutiful, dead behind the eyes. But Serena caught the flicker, the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his thumb pressed white against the leather grip. He would not intervene. None of them would. That was the architecture of this kingdom now. 1,000 small surrenders stacked on top of each other until the pile was so high no one could see over it anymore. "That's enough," Darius said finally. His voice carried the flat authority of a man who had never once had to raise it. "Let her up." Lyra turned her head. "She hasn't completed the gesture." "I said let her up." Something passed between them. A look Serena had catalogued 100 times. Lyra calculating, Darius deflecting. 2 predators circling a kill neither wanted to share but neither would abandon. It lasted 3 seconds. Then Lyra smiled, the kind of smile that had no warmth in it, only victory deferred. "Of course, my king." Serena rose. Her knees ached. A small bloom of red marked the marble where her left knee had pressed too hard against a rough seam. She looked at the blood for a moment and felt nothing. That was new. She used to feel shame, then anger, then something worse than both. The numb acceptance that comes when a wound has been reopened so many times the nerve endings finally die. She turned and walked down the center aisle. 300 pairs of eyes followed her. No one spoke. No one moved to stop her. She was the Luna of the Silver Fang Kingdom, and she walked through their midst like a ghost passing through walls. Alpha Brennan of the Ashwood Pack stood near the back of the hall, his arms folded across his broad chest. He was a thick man with a scar that split his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. When Serena passed him, he dropped his gaze. Not in disrespect. In something else. something that looked like it might cost him to carry. She reached the doors. The guards pulled them open without being asked. The corridor beyond was darker and warmer, and when the doors closed behind her, the silence that followed was the loudest sound she had ever heard. Her handmaiden, Marin, was waiting in the alcove beside the stairwell. Marin was 19, sharp-faced, with the kind of stillness that came from growing up in a border pack where noise got you killed. She took one look at Serena's face and said nothing. She simply fell into step beside her, matching her pace as they climbed. They reached Serena's chambers, smaller than they had been 2 years ago, relocated from the royal wing to a corridor near the servants' quarters after Lyra had declared the Luna suite needed renovation. The renovation had never happened. Lyra's personal wardrobe occupied the space now. Serena closed the door, leaned against it, pressed her palms flat against the wood, and breathed. "How long?" Marin said quietly. It was not a question about time. 7 years, Serena said. 7 years, 4 months, and 11 days since the bonding ceremony. She opened her eyes. And tonight was the last time. Marin studied her. The last time she humiliates you, or the last time you let her? Both. Serena crossed to the narrow window. The kingdom spread below, torchlit courtyards, the jagged teeth of the outer wall, the black ribbon of the Thornwater River cutting through the valley. Beyond that, wilderness, unclaimed territory, rogue lands that Darius called wasteland and she had always called possibility. "Do you remember what my mother told me before the bonding?" Serena said. "You never told me." She said survival is not the same as living. She said some women confuse endurance with strength, and by the time they learn the difference, they have endured so long they have forgotten what strength feels like. Serena turned from the window. "I forgot, Marin. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I forgot." Down in the great hall, the summit continued. Serena could hear the low vibration of it through the stone, the hum of voices, the scrape of chairs, the occasional bark of laughter that always seemed to come from Lyra's end of the dais. She wondered if Darius laughed with her. She wondered if it mattered anymore. "We leave before dawn," Serena said. 3 horses, light packs, nothing that traces back to the palace. Marin's expression did not change. 3 horses? Ronan will come. The commander of the king's guard will desert his post. Ronan has been dead at his post for 2 years. He just hasn't had anywhere else to fall. Serena pulled a leather satchel from beneath her bed. Already packed, the buckles worn smooth from how many times she had opened it in the dark, checking and rechecking. "I spoke with him last month. He agreed." Marin looked at the satchel, looked at Serena. "You have been planning this for 5 months, and you didn't tell me. I didn't tell you because if they caught me, I needed you clean, unconnected, free to disappear on your own." Serena met her eyes. "That's not distrust, Marin. That's the only kind of protection I could still give anyone." Marin was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way border wolves nod, a single dip of the chin that meant more than any oath spoken in a hall of banners. 3 floors below, the summit feast had begun. Serena heard the clatter of platters, the clink of goblets, the rising tide of voices loosened by wine and politics. In the great hall, Darius would be holding court at the head of the long table, flanked by his generals and the alphas who had sworn fealty. Lyra would be beside him, her hand resting on his arm like a brand of ownership. The seat to his left, Serena's seat, the Luna's seat, would be empty. It had been empty for 3 winters now. She thought about that seat, about the way absence becomes architecture. Leave a chair empty long enough and people stop seeing it. They rearrange themselves around the gap until the gap becomes part of the design. That was what had happened to her. She had been rearranged, absorbed into the negative space of her own life until she was nothing but the outline of something that used to be there. Not anymore. She pulled on a riding cloak, dark, unadorned, the kind worn by merchant couriers on long routes, tucked the satchel under her arm, checked the window again. The courtyard below was emptying as the last of the summit delegates filed inside for the feast. 2 guards at the eastern gate, rotating on a standard pattern. Ronan had given her the rotation schedules weeks ago. Marin, the passage behind the old library. Sealed 2 years ago on Lyra's order. Unsealed 3 weeks ago on Ronan's. He replaced the mortar with chalk dust. 1 good kick and the wall gives. Marin almost smiled. Almost. "You really have been planning this. I had 7 years to learn every wall in this kingdom, every door, every crack they thought was too small to matter. Serena pulled the hood up. The cracks are always what bring the walls down. They moved through the corridors like shadows. The palace was a labyrinth of stone passages and spiral stairs, built over generations by kings who trusted no one and designed their home accordingly. Serena knew it intimately. Every servant's shortcut, every disused tunnel, every stretch of corridor where the torches were spaced far enough apart to create pockets of darkness wide enough to hide in. They passed the kitchens. The heat and noise billowed out through the open archway. Cooks shouting, copper pots clanging, the rich smell of roasted venison and root vegetables. A boy carrying a tray of bread nearly collided with them. Marin caught his shoulder, steadied him, and pushed him gently back toward the kitchen without a word. The old library was in the east wing, a room that had been converted into a storage vault after Lara declared that the shelves were needed for her personal collections. The books, hundreds of them, some older than the kingdom, had been moved to a cellar where the damp was already curling their pages. Serena had tried to intervene. Darius had told her not to make everything a battle. Don't make everything a battle. The words had become his refrain, his way of telling her that her concerns were too small, her voice too loud, her presence too inconvenient. Don't make everything a battle, Serena. As if the systematic dismantling of her position, her authority, her identity was something she should absorb quietly, as if silence were a virtue rather than a surrender. Ronan was waiting inside the library. He wore no armor, no insignia, just a plain leather jerkin and traveling boots. Without the commander's uniform, he looked smaller, older, the lines around his eyes deeper, the set of his mouth harder. He had a pack slung over one shoulder and a short sword at his hip. "Guards rotated 8 minutes ago," he said. "We have a window." "How long?" 6 minutes to the eastern gate, 4 minutes of blind spot before the next pass. That's tight. It's what we have. Serena looked at him, really looked. She had known Ronan for most of her time at Silver Fang. He had been a young officer when she first arrived as Darius's mate, rigid with duty, so devoted to the crown that he seemed more symbol than man. Something had broken in him since then. She had watched it happen. The slow erosion, the way each compromise carved a little more away until the man standing in front of her was held together by habit and not much else. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I mean that." "I know you do. If they catch you, then they catch a man who stopped believing in what he was guarding." Ronan adjusted the strap on his pack. "I made my peace with it, Luna. Don't take that from me." She nodded. Luna. He still called her that. In this palace, where the title had been stripped of everything but its letters, Ronan still used it like it meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe meaning was not something that could be taken away, only something you could stop claiming. They moved through the library to the back wall. Ronan found the section, a stretch of stone between two empty shelf brackets, indistinguishable from the rest. He pressed his boot against the base. The wall crumbled inward with a dry whisper, chalk dust puffing into the torchlight. Beyond it, a passage barely wide enough for one person, sloping down into darkness. "Single file," Ronan said, 50 yards to the outer foundation, then up through the drain channel to the eastern wall. "I remember," Serena said. He glanced at her. "You mapped this yourself?" "I mapped everything. Every exit, every vulnerability, every route that doesn't pass a guardhouse." She stepped through the gap in the wall. The air beyond was cold and tasted of earth and old rain. When you live in a cage long enough, you learn the shape of every bar. They moved fast. The passage was rough, unfinished stone, low ceiling, water trickling in thin lines down the walls. Marin went second, her breathing controlled and steady. Ronan brought up the rear, his hand on his sword, though there was nothing to fight down here but the dark and the damp and the weight of what they were leaving behind. The drain channel was worse. Narrow, steep, smelling of rust and stagnant water. They climbed using iron brackets set into the wall, their boots slipping on the wet metal. Serena's hands ached. Her shoulders burned. But the burning felt good. It felt like movement, like direction, like the opposite of kneeling on cold marble while a woman who stole your life told you to bow lower. They emerged through a grate in the eastern wall, just above the tree line. The night air hit Serena like a fist, clean and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and frost and open ground. Below, the kingdom sprawled in the dark, a constellation of torchlight and chimney smoke. Above, a sky so thick with stars it looked wounded. 3 horses waited in the tree cover exactly where Ronan had arranged. Dark animals, well-fed, saddled for distance. No silver fang markings, no bells, no banners. Just 3 mounts pointed away from everything Serena had known for 7 years. She stood there for a moment, hand on the saddle, and let herself feel it. The pull backward was physical, a hook behind her sternum tugging toward the palace, toward the life she had built even as it was dismantled around her. She had loved Darius once, truly, badly, completely. She had believed in his vision for the kingdom, in the strength of his convictions, in the way he could command a room with nothing but the weight of his voice. She had believed that love would be enough to hold her place beside him. It was not enough. It had never been enough. Love without respect was just a prettier kind of imprisonment. She swung into the saddle. South first, she said, across the Thornwater, then west through the Ashvale Pass. We ride until dawn, rest through the day, and ride again. Where are we going? Marin asked. Serena turned her horse toward the dark line of trees beyond the river. The palace was behind her now, its towers cutting black shapes against the starfield. She did not look back. She had spent 7 years looking back, at what she had lost, at what had been taken, at the woman she might have been if she had spoken sooner, fought harder, refused to kneel. Looking back was a luxury for people who had somewhere to return to. The rogue territories, Serena said. There are packs out there, some scattered, leaderless, cast out by kingdoms that used them and discarded them. Merchants whose trade routes were strangled by silver fang tariffs. Alphas who were loyal until loyalty became a death sentence. She steadied the horse beneath her. They have been waiting for someone to give them a reason to stand. And you intend to be that reason. I intend to be the one who shows up. They rode. The sound of hooves on frozen ground was the only thing that followed them. Not pursuit, not alarms, not the howl of sentries raising the watch. The palace slept. The kingdom slept. And in the sleeping, no one noticed the gap where the Luna used to be. In the great hall, the feast roared on. Darius raised his goblet and the hall thundered with approval. Lyra leaned close to him, whispering something that made him nod without smiling. The alphas drank. The generals boasted. The banners of every sworn pack hung still in the heated air. No one checked the Luna's chambers that night. No one had checked them in weeks. They crossed the Thornwater before moonset. The river was shallow at the ford Ronan had scouted, the horses splashing through water that came up to their fetlocks. On the other side, the land changed. Wilder, rougher, the kind of terrain that Darius dismissed as unworkable and Serena saw as uncontrolled. The trees grew thick and tangled, their branches interlocking overhead to form a canopy that blocked out the sky. By dawn, they had covered 20 miles. Ronan found a sheltered hollow between 2 rock outcroppings, screened by deadfall and thick brush. They dismounted, watered the horses, built no fire. Serena sat on a flat stone and opened the satchel. Inside were documents, not originals, but copies she had made painstakingly over months, writing by candlelight in a locked room while the palace slept. Trade records showing resources diverted from border packs to fund Lyra's private ventures. Council minutes altered to erase dissenting votes. Correspondence between Lyra and Alpha Kyle of the Blackmere Pack, discussing the removal of loyalist commanders. Ronan leaned against a tree and watched her spread the papers on the stone. You think paper will bring down an empire? Paper is how empires keep their secrets. Paper is how they make the ugly things look official. Serena smoothed a crease from one of the sheets. And paper is how you prove the official things were ugly all along. Darius will deny everything. Darius doesn't know half of what Lyra has done. That's the part that will hurt him most. Not the betrayal, but the proof that he was too blind to see it. She gathered the documents and slid them back into the satchel. A king who can't see the rot in his own court is not a king who deserves his crown. Marin was already asleep, curled against the base of the rock, with her cloak pulled over her shoulders. She slept the way border wolves slept, shallow, quick, her hand near her belt knife even in dreams. Serena watched her for a moment and felt a fierce, protective ache in her chest. This girl had followed her into exile without hesitation. That meant something. In a kingdom where loyalty was bought and sold like grain, it meant everything. Get some rest, Ronan said. I'll take first watch. I don't think I can sleep. Try anyway. The body doesn't care about revolutions. It cares about fuel. She lay down on the cold ground with her cloak beneath her and the satchel against her ribs. The sky was lightening in the east, turning the clouds the color of old iron. She closed her eyes and saw the great hall, the marble, the blood on her knee. Lyra's mouth shaping the word lower. Sleep did not come for a long time. When it finally did, it was thin and restless, threaded with images of burning banners and empty thrones, and a man sitting alone in a hall where no one called him king anymore. She woke to Ronan's hand on her shoulder and a sky the color of cooling steel. Late afternoon, she had slept longer than she intended. "Riders," Ronan said. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent 20 years managing crises for someone else. Coming from the northeast, 6 of them, moving fast. Serena was on her feet before the last word left his mouth. Marin was already awake, crouched by the horses, tightening cinches with quick, practiced hands. "King's Guard?" Serena asked. "Can't tell yet, but they're riding formation, and nobody rides formation through rogue territory unless they're searching for something." Serena grabbed the satchel, pressed it against her body. These documents were not replaceable. They were 5 months of stolen hours and careful hands, and the kind of risk that gets you executed for treason if the wrong person finds you at the wrong moment. "We ride," she said. "If they've picked up our trail, then we give them a different trail to follow." She swung onto her horse. "Ronan, the split canyon 3 miles west. You described it to me. 2 forks, one leading north to the ridgeline, one dropping south into the gorge." "I remember." "We take the south fork. You take the north. Make noise. Leave tracks. Draw them up the ridge and double back after dark." Ronan stared at her. "You want me to run decoy. I want you to survive it. There is a difference. And if they catch me? Tell them the truth. Tell them the Luna fled south and you tried to bring her back. Tell them you lost her trail at the canyon. You are still the commander of the King's Guard. Your word carries weight." Carried weight. Past tense. "Then make it carry one more time." He held her gaze. Something moved behind his eyes, but not doubt, not fear, but the kind of calculation a soldier makes when the math of survival stops being abstract. Then he mounted his horse. "South Fork is narrow, single file for a quarter mile, then it opens up. Stay on the left bank. The right side floods in snowmelt." "I know." "You don't know this terrain, Luna." "I know terrain. I know what it means to read the ground and trust it more than the people standing on it." She turned her horse west. "Find us at the old watchtower on the Ashevale border. 3 days." "And if I don't come?" Serena looked at him. This man who had stood at attention while her life was dismantled, who had watched and done nothing and hated himself for it, who was now riding into the open with a target on his back because she had asked him to. "Then I will remember that you did." They split at the canyon mouth. Ronan pushed his horse north at a hard gallop, the hoofbeats echoing off the rock walls like war drums. Serena and Marin plunged south into the narrow fork, the walls closing around them, the sky shrinking to a strip of gray above. The canyon was dark and cold. Water dripped from the walls. The horses picked their way over loose stone, their breathing loud in the enclosed space. Behind them, faintly, Serena heard shouts. The riders had reached the split. She pressed her heels into the horses' flanks and did not look back. They rode for an hour. The canyon opened gradually, the walls pulling apart like hands releasing a held breath. The terrain leveled into a valley. Scrubby pines, frozen meadow, the skeletal remains of a watchtower on the far ridge that had not been manned in decades. Marin pulled alongside her. They went north, all 6. "You're sure?" I counted the echoes. 6 horses heading up the ridge. Serena exhaled. Her hands were shaking on the reins. She gripped harder. The shaking was not fear. It was the body catching up to what the mind had already committed to. The understanding that she was now a fugitive from the kingdom she had helped build. That the man she had loved would call her a traitor. That the word traitor would be easier for him than the word wrong. They made camp as the last light bled from the sky. No fire again. Cold rations. Dried meat, hard bread, a skin of water that tasted like leather. Serena ate mechanically, chewing without tasting, her eyes on the southern horizon where the rogue territories began. "Tell me about the packs," Marin said. "The ones you mentioned, the scattered ones." Serena wrapped her cloak tighter. "There is a pack called the Dawnbreak in the southern valleys. Their alpha was a woman named Thessa. She swore loyalty to Silver Fang 8 years ago in exchange for trade access. Darius took the loyalty and closed the trade routes anyway. She has been surviving on barter and stubbornness ever since." "And she will trust you?" "She will trust anyone who arrives with proof that her betrayal was deliberate and documented." Serena touched the satchel. "Trust is easy when you bring receipts." "What about the merchants?" "There are 16 independent trading families between here and the coast. Silver Fang tariffs have crushed 11 of them. The other 5 survive by smuggling. All of them hate the crown. None of them have had anyone worth organizing around." She paused. "Until now." Marin looked at her for a long time. The darkness was thick around them, the kind of darkness that exists only in places where no one has built anything worth lighting. "You're not just running," Marin said. "No. You're building something." "I am finding the pieces that were thrown away and putting them together." Serena lay back against the cold ground. "Every kingdom thinks its scraps are worthless. That is always their mistake." The night deepened. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. 2 notes, low and questioning, then silence. Serena listened to it and thought about Darius, about the man he had been before Lyra, about the way his hands used to cup her face when he kissed her, careful, like he was afraid she might break, about the exact moment he stopped being afraid of that. She could pinpoint it. A council meeting, 3 years in. Lyra had challenged one of Serena's proposals, a modest expansion of medical resources to the outer packs. Darius had listened to both arguments, then sided with Lyra. Not because Lyra was right, because Lyra made the siding feel inevitable. She had that gift, the ability to make surrender feel like strategy. That was the night Serena stopped sleeping through the dark. That was the night the mapping began. She rolled onto her side and pressed her face against the satchel. The leather smelled of ink and dust, and the particular staleness of rooms where secrets are kept too long. Inside those pages was every lie Lyra had ever institutionalized, every number she had falsified, every commander she had reassigned to clear her path, every pack she had starved to feed her ambition. It was not revenge. Revenge was personal, narrow, a blade aimed at one throat. This was something else. This was the architecture of accountability. A structure built from evidence, designed to hold weight, meant to stand long after the anger that built it had cooled. But tonight, in the dark, with her knees still aching and the memory of marble still cold against her skin, it felt like revenge. And she did not apologize for it. Miles to the north, in the split canyon, 6 riders followed Ronan's trail up the ridge. They did not know they were chasing a decoy. They did not know the woman they were looking for was already 20 miles south, lying in the dark with a satchel full of proof, and a plan that would take the shape of the kingdom and break it along every fault line Darius had refused to see. And in the great hall of the Silver Fang Palace, the feast had ended. The tables were cleared, the candles burned to stubs. Darius sat alone on his throne in the empty hall, turning an undrunk goblet of wine in his hands. He had not asked about Serena. He had not sent anyone to check on her. He assumed she was in her chambers, nursing her wounded pride the way she always did, quietly, invisibly, in the margins of a kingdom that had stopped making room for her. He did not yet know that the margins were empty. He did not yet know that the woman he had dismissed as fragile had already begun to dismantle everything he built. Not from the center, where he kept his guards and his generals and his certainty, but from the edges, where the cracks had been growing for years in the dark, waiting for someone patient enough to find them. The goblet turned in his hands, the hall was silent, and somewhere in the wilderness beyond the Thornwater, Serena Vale was not sleeping, not weeping, not kneeling. She was counting. She was still counting when the sun broke over the valley 3 days later. Serena stood at the edge of a ridge overlooking the Dawnbreak settlement, if it could be called that. A cluster of timber structures built low against the wind, smoke threading from chimneys that leaned at angles suggesting repairs made with whatever was at hand. Livestock pens half empty. A watchtower on the northern perimeter with a cracked bell that probably had not rung in years. The whole place had the look of something that had been dying slowly and had simply decided to keep breathing out of spite. Marin crouched beside her. "This is the pack you want to build an alliance with." This is the pack Silver Fang starved into irrelevance. There's a difference between what something is and what it was forced to become. And their alpha? Thessa Dawnbreak, 46. Lost her mate in a border skirmish Darius provoked and never acknowledged. Raised 3 sons alone while running a pack that the crown treated like a resource depot. Serena started down the slope. She has every reason to listen. She has every reason to put a knife in us and send our heads back in a sack. That is also listening. They reached the settlement's edge and were met by 2 wolves before they cleared the tree line, young males, lean and hard-eyed, carrying hunting spears with tips that had been sharpened past function into threat. One of them stepped forward. His jaw was set in a way that said he had been given instructions and intended to follow them regardless of what walked out of those trees. No Silver Fang wolves past this point. Serena stopped, pulled back her hood, let them see her face. I am not a Silver Fang wolf. Not anymore. The second guard looked at the first. Something passed between them. Recognition, confusion, the rapid recalculation that happens when the person standing in front of you does not match the threat you were told to expect. You are the Luna. I was the Luna. Now I am a woman standing in your territory without weapons, without guards, without a kingdom. And I am asking to speak with your alpha. The first guard did not lower his spear. Thessa does not meet with the crown's people. Good. Because the crown's people do not know I am here, and if you send me away, they never will. Serena held his gaze. But if you let me through, I can show your alpha something that will explain exactly why her pack has been bleeding for 8 years. Silence. Wind through the pines, the distant sound of an axe hitting wood somewhere in the settlement. The guard's spear tip wavered. Not much, just a degree, the kind of movement that happens when certainty develops a crack. Wait here. He disappeared into the settlement. The second guard stayed, his eyes moving between Serena and Marin with the focused attention of someone who has been trained to watch for the thing that does not fit. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Long enough for the cold to work through Serena's cloak and settle into her bones. Then the first guard returned. Behind him walked a woman who moved like weather. Not fast, not slow, but with the kind of inevitability that makes you step aside without knowing why. Thessa Dawnbreak was not tall. She was not broad. She was built like a stripped branch, all angles and sinew, the kind of body that gets carved by years of doing too much with too little. Her hair was iron gray, pulled back in a knot that was functional rather than decorative. Her eyes were the color of riverstone, and they fixed on Serena with an intensity that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with assessment. The Luna of Silver Fang, Thessa said, standing in my dirt. Former Luna. There is no former. The bond mark does not care about your politics. Thessa stopped 6 feet away, close enough to speak, far enough to strike. Why are you here? Because your pack is dying, and I know who killed it. Thessa's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. A door opening 1 inch, just enough to see what was on the other side. Come inside. Thessa's quarters were a single room attached to the pack's main hall. A stone hearth, a wooden table scarred with knife marks, 2 chairs that did not match, pelts on the floor instead of rugs. The room smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs and the particular staleness of a space where hard decisions are made regularly and celebrated never. Thessa sat, did not offer Serena a chair. Serena took one anyway. Talk. Serena opened the satchel and laid 3 documents on the table. These are copies of Silver Fang Trade Council records from 6 years ago. This one shows the tariff schedule imposed on your territory. This one shows the actual revenue collected, and this one shows where the difference went. Thessa looked at the papers, did not touch them. I know where the difference went, into the Crown's vault. No, into Lyra Ashbourne's private accounts. Darius never saw these numbers. The tariffs you paid were doubled at the collection point by agents Lyra installed after she had the original trade commissioners reassigned. Half went to the Crown, half went to fund her personal network. Wolves loyal to her, not to the kingdom. Thessa was quiet for a long time. Her hands lay flat on the table, the knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped half an octave. You are telling me my people starved so that woman could buy loyalty. I am telling you it was systematic, documented, deliberate, and your pack was not the only one. Serena pulled out more pages. The Red Hollow, the Ashwood, the Northern Ridge's Eastern Holdings. 11 packs in total, all subjected to the same scheme. Lyra built an empire inside the empire, and she funded it by bleeding the territories Darius considered expendable. And you expect me to care about the difference between the king's cruelty and his mistress's greed. I expect you to care that the king does not know, that if he is confronted with proof, not rumor, not accusation, but proof, his authority collapses. Because a king who cannot see the rot in his own court is a king whose court no longer belongs to him. Tessa leaned back, studied Serena the way you study a map of terrain you are about to cross, looking for the traps, the dead ends, the places where the ground might give way. What do you want from me? Nothing today. I want you to read these documents, verify what you can against your own records, and when you are satisfied that I am telling the truth, I want you to send word to the other packs on this list. Serena placed a folded paper on the table. There are wolves out there who have been waiting for a reason to stop enduring and start acting. I am not asking them to fight. I am asking them to stand. Standing is fighting when you have been told to kneel. Then we understand each other. Tessa picked up the folded paper, opened it, read the names. Her expression did not change, but her breathing did. A slight quickening, the involuntary response of a body recognizing that the scope of what it is looking at has just expanded beyond what the mind was prepared for. You have been busy. I have been patient. There is a difference. In my experience, the patient ones are the most dangerous. In my experience, the dangerous ones are the ones who were never given a choice. Tessa folded the paper and slid it into her belt. She looked at Serena for a long moment, and something in her face softened. Not into warmth, but into a kind of grim recognition. The recognition of one woman looking at another and seeing the same scars in different configurations. You can stay tonight. Tomorrow you ride. I will read your documents, and I will send no word to anyone until I have verified every number on every page. She stood. If you're lying to me, I will find you, and the conversation we have then will not involve chairs. I would expect nothing less. Serena and Marin were given a room in the pack hall, small, cold, furnished with 2 cots and a basin of water that had already started to ice at the edges. Marin sat on her cot and pulled off her boots. Her feet were blistered. She examined them with the detached attention of someone cataloging damage. She did not say yes, Marin said. She did not say no. In her position, that is the same thing. You gambled. I calculated. There is a difference. Serena sat on the edge of her cot. The exhaustion was hitting now, settling into her muscles like silt into a riverbed. Tessa has survived 8 years of deliberate neglect. A woman like that does not need to be convinced that the system is broken. She needs to be shown that someone else has the blueprint. And you have the blueprint. I have pieces. Tessa has pieces. The Ashwood pack has pieces. Every territory Lyra has bled has a fragment of the whole picture. Serena lay back. The ceiling was rough timber, the gaps between planks showing darkness above. No single pack can challenge Silver Fang alone, but together, with evidence, with coordination, they do not need to challenge. They just need to withdraw. Pull their resources, their allegiance, their trade. Let the Empire try to stand on nothing. That could take months. It will take months. Darius did not build Silver Fang in a day. I will not unbuild it in one either. Marin was quiet. Then softly, You still call him Darius, not the king, not the Alpha. Serena closed her eyes. He was Darius before he was any of those things, and the man I married, the one who existed before Lyra, before the court, before all of it, that man deserved better than what he became. But deserving does not change the math. Her voice dropped. He chose. Every day he chose. And choosing is the one thing you do not get to undo. The next morning, Ronan arrived. He rode in at first light, his horse lathered and blowing, a gash across his left forearm that he had bound with a strip torn from his shirt. The dawnbreak guard stopped him at the perimeter. Serena heard the commotion and came out to find him standing with his hands raised while 2 spear points hovered near his throat. "He is with me," Serena said. Tessa appeared in the doorway of her quarters, arms folded. "The commander of the king's guard, in my settlement." Former commander, Ronan said. He lowered his hand slowly, as of approximately 48 hours ago. What happened? Serena asked, looking at his arm. The riders. They caught up on the ridge. 4 of them peeled off when they realized I was alone. 2 stayed. He flexed his hand, testing the wound. I convinced them to stop following. How? By being more trouble than I was worth. He looked at Thessa. I am not here as Silver Fang. I am here because the woman I swore to protect is standing in your camp, and my oath did not come with a geography requirement. Thessa regarded him for a long moment. You left 2 King's Guard riders on a ridge somewhere in the rogue territories. They are alive, bruised and horseless, but alive. And when they walk back to the palace and report, they will report that Commander Ronan has deserted. Darius will issue a warrant, and every patrol in the kingdom will be looking for a man instead of a woman. He glanced at Serena, which, if I am not mistaken, was the point. Serena met his eyes. He knew. He had known from the moment she asked him to ride decoy that the diversion was not just tactical, it was strategic. His desertion would consume Darius's attention, redirect the search, create noise in a system that was designed to run on discipline and silence. One disgraced commander was a scandal. A missing Luna was a problem, but a missing Luna with no trail was a problem Darius could ignore. A traitorous commander was a wound to his pride, and Darius had never been able to ignore those. You used me, Ronan said. There was no anger in it, just the flat acknowledgement of a man who has been in enough campaigns to recognize when he has been deployed. I gave you a choice. You made it. And if I had chosen differently, then I would have found another way to give Darius something to chase that was not me. She held his gaze. I do not waste people, Ronan, but I do not pretend that what we are doing has no cost. He nodded, slow, final, the nod of a man who has just heard the terms of a contract he already signed. Thessa watched this exchange with an expression Serena could not read. Then she turned back to her quarters and spoke over her shoulder. Feed the commander, stitch his arm, and tell my sons to bring the Ashwood messenger. We have letters to write. Serena felt something shift, not in the air, not in the ground, but in the current that runs beneath decisions. The deep pull of events beginning to align in a direction that cannot be reversed. Thessa had not said yes last night, but she was writing letters this morning, and in the language of wolves who had survived by measuring every word and rationing every gesture, that was more than agreement. That was commitment. By midday, 3 messengers had ridden out of the Dawnbreak settlement carrying sealed letters to 3 separate territories. Serena did not know what Thessa had written. She did not ask. Trust was a thing you built in increments, and demanding to read someone's correspondence on the second day of an alliance was a good way to ensure there was no third day. Instead, she sat at Thessa's table with the trade documents spread between them and answered questions. Thessa was methodical. She cross-referenced every number against her own records, which she kept in a locked chest beneath her bed, written in a shorthand that no one else in the pack could read. When the numbers matched, she said nothing. When they did not match, she said the number aloud and waited for Serena to explain the discrepancy. It was tedious, precise work. It was also the most important work Serena had done since leaving the palace. This figure here, Thessa said, pointing to a column of numbers on one of the trade records. The levy on processed timber. Your document says 40%. My records say 25. 25 was the official rate set by the Crown's Trade Council. 40 was the rate Lyra's agents collected at the border checkpoints. The difference, 15% of every timber shipment your pack produced for 6 years, went into a private fund managed by a wolf named Corvin Hale. I know that name. He ran the Eastern checkpoint. He ran it for Lyra. And when Darius audited the checkpoints 2 years ago, Corvin presented books that showed the 25% rate. Clean books. Lyra had them prepared in advance. Serena tapped the document. But she kept the real books too. That is the kind of person she is. She documents everything because she believes documentation is power. And she is right. It is power. It just depends on who holds it. Thessa sat back. Her jaw was tight. The tendons in her neck stood out like cables. 6 years, she said. 6 years my people went hungry because a woman I have never met decided our labor was her personal treasury. Yes, and your king, your mate, sat on his throne and saw nothing. He saw what he wanted to see. That is not blindness. It is something worse. Thessa looked at her, hard, searching. You loved him. It was not a question. Serena answered it anyway. I loved who he was before he stopped needing to be that person, before Lyra made it easier to be someone else. She gathered the documents. Her hands were steady. Love does not make you blind. It makes you patient. And patience without a deadline is just another word for surrender. The afternoon faded. The messengers were gone. The letters were sent. Somewhere to the northeast, Darius was learning that his commander had deserted. Somewhere to the south, alphas who had been dismissed and discarded and bled dry were receiving word that someone had finally counted the cost and written it down. Serena stood at the edge of the dawnbreak settlement as the sun dropped behind the western ridge. The valley below was turning purple in the failing light. She could see the thin line of a road winding south, a trade route that should have been thriving, that should have been carrying goods and wealth into this settlement instead of out of it. It lay empty. A scar on the landscape, evidence of a wound that had been inflicted so slowly no one noticed until the blood was already gone. Marin appeared beside her. Thessa's third son just returned from the eastern ridge. He says the king's guard patrols have doubled along the Thornwater. Darius is closing the borders. He is looking for you. He is looking for a woman he thinks ran away. He does not know that the running stopped the moment I crossed the river. Serena turned from the valley. Let him close his borders. Let him search every road and every pass. Every patrol he sends outward is a patrol he does not have inward. Every resource he spends looking for me is a resource he cannot spend holding together the cracks that are already forming. And when he stops looking? Serena walked back toward the settlement. The torches were being lit along the perimeter, small points of fire pushing back against the dark. In the main hall, she could hear voices. Thessa's people, talking, arguing, doing the noisy work of living that happens in every pack regardless of how close to the edge they have been pushed. He will not stop. That is the one thing I can count on. She paused at the door of the hall. Darius does not abandon hunts. He does not accept losses, and he does not admit that something he owned could choose to leave. Her hand rested on the doorframe. He will chase this until chasing is all he has left, and by then, there will be nothing left to chase. Inside the hall, Thessa was standing at the head of a long table where her people had gathered for the evening meal. She looked up when Serena entered. Their eyes met across the room. Two women separated by a table and a lifetime of different wounds that had somehow led to the same scar. Thessa raised a cup. Not high, not theatrically, just enough to be seen. Serena nodded. And on the table between them, beneath platters of bread and salted meat and the small dignities of a meal shared by people who had learned to survive on less than they deserved, the documents lay in a leather satchel with their edges curling in the heat. Each page a splinter pulled from the body of an empire that did not yet know it was bleeding. Far to the north, in the palace of the Silverfang Kingdom, Darius Thorn stood in the Luna's empty chambers. The bed was made, the wardrobe cleared, the window stood open to the winter air, and the curtains moved like something breathing in a room where no one breathed anymore. He picked up a folded cloth from the bedside table, pressed it to his face. It smelled like her. Not perfume, not oils, but the base scent underneath all of that, the one that had lived in the hollow of her throat and the insides of her wrists and the places where her skin was thinnest. The scent a wolf knows before he knows anything else. Lyra appeared in the doorway. The commander has been declared a deserter. I have authorized a warrant for— Get out. She stopped. Darius, I said get out. She left. Her footsteps retreated down the corridor, measured, unhurried, the walk of a woman who does not run from anger because she has learned how to outlast it. Darius stood in the empty room with the cloth pressed to his face and breathed in the ghost of a woman he had spent 7 years failing to see. The wind came through the open window and moved the curtains and carried the scent away, particle by particle, until there was nothing left but cold air and the sound of his own breathing in a room that had stopped being hers long before she stopped being in it. He lowered the cloth, looked at the window, at the dark beyond it, at the vast, indifferent wilderness that stretched in every direction and contained, somewhere in its depth, the only person who had ever loved him without wanting his crown. His hand closed around the cloth until his knuckles went white. Then he turned and walked out of the room, and he did not close the door behind him, because closing it would have meant admitting she was gone, and Darius Thorn had never in his life admitted anything that made him smaller than the man he believed himself to be. The letters came back wrong. Serena knew it before Thessa said a word. She knew it from the way Thessa stood in the doorway of the main hall at dawn, her shoulders squared against something heavier than the morning cold, her hand resting not on the doorframe but against it. The posture of a woman bracing for impact rather than leaning for comfort. 3 messengers had ridden out. 2 had returned. The third had not. Ashwood replied, Thessa said. Her voice was stripped down, no inflection, the vocal equivalent of a blade laid flat. They are in. Alpha Brennan sends word that he has been waiting for someone to move first, and he will open his territory to any pack that joins the coalition. And the Northern Ridge? The Northern Ridge messenger came back with an escort. 4 Silver Fang soldiers rode him to our border, watched him dismount, and left without a word. Serena felt the cold settle into her sternum. Not surprised, she had planned for resistance, for delays, for the slow grinding friction of packs too beaten down to trust quickly. But an escort meant interception. Interception meant Darius knew the letters existed. And if he knew the letters existed, he knew Serena was not running. She was organizing. The 4th pack, Serena said, the Black Mirror, your 3rd messenger. Thessa's jaw tightened. Has not returned. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the walls of the hall, against the low ceiling, against the faces of the dawnbreak wolves who had gathered behind Thessa without being called, drawn by the instinct that tells a pack when the air has changed. Black Mirror's alpha is Kyle, Serena said. I have documents showing correspondence between him and Lyra. If the messenger reached Kyle, and Kyle is still loyal to Lyra, then your messenger is dead and your plan is compromised. Serena did not flinch, but her hands, resting at her sides, closed into fists so tight the tendons stood out like wire. The satchel was in her quarters. The documents inside it were the spine of everything she had built. 5 months of stolen hours, of writing by candlelight with the door locked and the curtains drawn, of copying numbers so carefully her fingers cramped into claws. If Kyle had the messenger, he might have a letter. If he had a letter, he had names. And names were the one currency that could not be forged, recalled, or denied. How much was in the letter to Kyle? Serena asked. Thessa's eyes narrowed. You did not write them. I gave you the names. You wrote the content. How much did you include? Enough to explain the purpose, not enough to detail the evidence. Did you name the other packs? Thessa hesitated. 1 beat, 2, long enough for Serena to feel the ground shift beneath her. Not physically, but in the way the ground shifts when you realize the foundation you built on has a fracture you did not see. I named the Ashwood, as an example of a pack already committed. Serena's breath left her in a slow, controlled exhale, the kind of breath a body pushes out when it needs to make room for something worse than air. Brennan, the Ashwood Alpha who had dropped his gaze when Serena walked past him in the Great Hall, the man who had sent word that he was ready to stand. His name was now in the hands of a wolf who answered to Lyra Ashbourne. Ronan appeared from the corridor behind Thessa. He had heard everything. His face was the composed blank of a man who has spent 2 decades processing bad intelligence without letting it reach his expression. But his hand was on his sword, and his weight had shifted to the balls of his feet. A fighter's stance, adopted unconsciously, the body preparing for what the mind had not yet decided. If Kyle sends that letter to Lyra, Ronan said, Brennan is exposed. She will move on the Ashwood within days. She will move on everyone, Serena said. Kale's letter names this settlement, names me, names the coalition. She looked at Thessa. How fast can you mobilize your people? Mobilize for what? We are 60 wolves. Half of them are too young or too old to fight. We do not have the numbers for a war. This is not a war. This is an evacuation. Serena crossed to the table where the documents had been spread the night before. She gathered them with fast, precise hands. The muscle memory of a woman who had learned that the interval between discovery and disaster is measured in minutes, not hours. If Lyra sends soldiers, they will come for the evidence first and the people second. We move the evidence. We scatter the trail. And we get word to Brennan before Lyra's wolves reach the Ashwood. And if it is already too late? Serena stopped, looked at Thessa. The older woman's face was carved from something harder than stone, from the compressed layers of 8 years of watching her pack starve while an empire grew fat on what was taken from them. She was not afraid. Fear requires uncertainty, and Thessa had lived past uncertainty into the territory beyond it, the place where you know exactly how bad things can get because you have already been there. Then we find out what we are willing to lose, Serena said, and we decide if it is less than what we have already lost. They moved fast. Thessa's sons, 3 men built from the same hard material as their mother, organized the settlement with the efficiency of people who had drilled for disaster without ever naming it that. Supplies packed, livestock released to forage. The old and the young loaded onto 2 carts pointed south toward a network of caves in the lower valleys that Thessa's pack had used as shelters during border raids years ago. No one argued, no one asked questions. They had been living on the edge long enough to know that when the edge crumbles, you do not stand on it and discuss the geology. Serena pulled Marin aside. You ride to the Ashwood, take the western route through the gorge. It adds 4 hours, but the Silver Fang patrols will not expect anyone to cross there in winter. And when I arrive, tell Brennan his name is compromised. Tell him to disperse his people and bury anything that connects him to us, letters, records, anything with my name or Thessa's. Marin's face was tight. He will want to know if you are abandoning the plan. Tell him the plan is not a straight line. Tell him it is a river. You dam it in one place. It finds another way through. Serena gripped Marin's arm, not gently, with the force of someone transferring urgency through contact. And tell him this is not a request. If Lyra's wolves reach the Ashwood before he scatters, there will be no Ashwood. Lyra does not arrest. She erases. Marin rode out within the hour. Serena watched her go, a small figure on a dark horse, disappearing into the tree line, like a stone dropping into deep water. No ripple. No trace. The border wolf training that made Marin seem forgettable was the same training that might keep her alive. Ronan found Serena standing at the northern perimeter, staring at the road that led back toward Silver Fang territory. The settlement behind them was emptying, carts creaking south, the last of the livestock being herded into the tree cover. The hearth fires extinguished one by one until the smoke stopped threading from the chimneys, and the buildings looked like what they would eventually become, abandoned structures in a valley no one would fight over. You should not be standing in the open, Ronan said. I need to see the road. The road will not tell you what you want to know. The road will tell me how much time we have. If Kael sent the letter by messenger, we have 2 days before Lyra can mobilize. If he sent it by fast rider, we have less. She did not turn from the road. And if he sent it the same day the messenger arrived, we have already run out. Ronan stood beside her, not speaking, just present. His silence had a different quality than it used to. Back in the palace, his silence had been duty, the professional quiet of a man who is paid to watch and not comment. Now it was something else. Solidarity, maybe. Or the silence of 2 people standing on the same piece of ground and knowing it might not hold. I made a mistake, Serena said. You made a calculation. It did not pay out. It was a mistake. I included Kael on the list because the document showed Lyra's agents had bled his territory as badly as the others. I assumed the damage would make him an ally. Her voice was flat, clinical. The voice of a woman performing surgery on her own judgment without anesthetic. I forgot that some wolves would rather serve the hand that bleeds them than trust the one offering a bandage. Because the bleeding is familiar, and familiar pain is easier to bear than unfamiliar freedom. That is not a mistake. That is a lesson. The difference depends on whether you survive it. A sound reached them, distant, carried on the wind from the northeast. Hoofbeats. Not many. 3, maybe 4 riders, moving at a pace that was not urgent but was not casual. The pace of wolves who know where they are going and are in no hurry because they know what they will find when they arrive. Ronan drew his sword. The steel made no sound leaving the scabbard. He had wrapped the mouth of the sheath in oiled leather years ago, a field habit that separated career soldiers from ceremonial ones. Into the trees, he said. No. Serena, if I run now, I am a fugitive. If I stand here and face whoever is coming, I am something else. She turned from the road and looked at him. Her eyes were dry. Her breathing was steady. But something in her face had changed, a hardening, a narrowing, the expression of a woman who has just discovered the difference between planning for disaster and standing inside one. I did not leave the palace to spend the rest of my life hiding in valleys and sleeping in caves. I left to build something, and you cannot build anything from a position of retreat. You can build nothing from a position of death. Then I will have to make sure that is not the position I am in. The riders appeared at the crest of the northern ridge. 4 of them. Not Silverfang soldiers. The armor was wrong, the formation too loose, the horses too lean. Rogue territory wolves, riding hard but not in pursuit. Riding with purpose. The lead rider was a woman. She was young, mid-20s, dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and a scar that ran from her left ear to the corner of her mouth. She rode without a saddle, her thighs gripping the horse's flanks with the unconscious strength of someone who had been riding before she could walk. When she reached the perimeter, she swung down and landed in a crouch, one hand on the ground, one hand empty and raised, the rogue sign for unarmed approach. "I am looking for the Luna," she said. Serena stepped forward. "You found her." The woman straightened. Her eyes moved over Serena, assessing, cataloging, performing the rapid evaluation that rogue wolves learn as a survival skill because the wrong trust gets you killed and the right trust is the only thing keeping you alive. "My name is Jester. I ride for the Thornfield Remnant, what is left of the pack your mate disbanded 4 years ago for refusing to tithe." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded letter. "This came to us from a merchant runner on the southern route. It is addressed to any pack willing to listen." Serena took the letter, opened it, read it twice. It was from Brennan. Not a response to Marin. Marin could not have reached the Ashwood yet. This was something Brennan had written on his own, before the warning, before the compromise. A letter he had sent south through the merchant networks that operated below the Crown's notice. The same networks Lyra had used to build her private empire, now carrying messages in the opposite direction. The letter was short. It said that the Ashwood Pack had evidence of systematic exploitation by Silverfang's inner court. It said that a coalition was forming. It said that the former Luna of Silverfang was alive and organizing. And it said that any pack that had been bled, discarded, or broken by the Crown's policies was invited to send a representative to a meeting at a location Brennan had specified. A neutral territory, a ruined fortress on the border between the Rogue territories and the Ashwood lands. Brennan had not waited. He had not sat on the information Serena had sent and weighed it cautiously the way Thessa had. He had taken the evidence, recognized it for what it was, and acted, unilaterally, without coordination, without permission, with the impulsive conviction of a man who has been carrying rage for years and has just been given a target, which meant the letter was already circulating, which meant packs Serena had never contacted, packs she had no relationship with, packs whose loyalties and motivations she could not predict, were now receiving an invitation that bore her name. Serena's hands trembled. She folded the letter carefully, precisely. The way you fold something when your body needs a task small enough to anchor it while your mind processes something too large to hold. "How many packs have seen this?" Serena asked. Desta shrugged. "The merchant runner said he carried copies to 6 territories. How many of those territories passed it further, I could not say." She paused. "We are not the only ones who came. I passed 2 other riding parties on the southern road, both headed toward the fortress Brennan named." Serena closed her eyes. The plan, her plan, the careful, methodical, evidence-first architecture she had spent 5 months constructing, was no longer hers. It had been picked up by hands she did not know and carried in directions she could not control. Brennan had turned a scalpel into a signal fire, and signal fires do not care who sees them. Everything she had built on patience, on precision, on the controlled release of information to verified allies, all of it was now exposed, open, visible to anyone with eyes, including the wolves in Silverfang's palace, who had spent their careers making visible threats disappear. She opened her eyes and looked at Ronan. He was watching her with the expression of a man who recognizes a battlefield when one forms around him. "The meeting at the fortress," he said. "If those packs show up, and Lyra has Kael's letter, she will know exactly where to find every dissident alpha in the rogue territories gathered in one place. Yes, it could be a slaughter. Or it could be the only chance we get." Serena looked south, toward the territory she had never seen, toward a ruined fortress she had never chosen, toward a gathering she had not called but could not afford to abandon. "Brennan forced my hand. The letters are out. The packs are moving. If I do not show up at that fortress, the coalition dies before it starts. Scattered, leaderless, picked off one by one. If I do show up, I walk into a location that Lara may already know about, with evidence that makes me the most wanted wolf in the kingdom. Those are not good options. They are the only options, and choosing between bad options is the only kind of choosing that has ever mattered. She turned to Desta. How far to the fortress? Day and a half. Hard riding. Can you guide us? Desta looked at the settlement, half emptied, the carts disappearing into the southern trees, the building standing hollow against the morning sky. She looked at Serena, at the satchel pressed against her ribs, at the expression on her face, which was not courage and not recklessness, but the harder thing that lives between them, the understanding that the moment for careful planning had passed and the moment for becoming something else had arrived. I can guide you, Desta said. But you should know. The wolves heading to that fortress are not politicians. They are not strategists. They are angry, hungry, and they have been waiting for someone to tell them their anger is justified. If you walk in there with documents and diplomacy, they will eat you alive. Then I will not walk in with documents and diplomacy. What will you walk in with? Serena looked at the road, at the trees, at the sky that was brightening into the hard white light of a winter morning that offered no warmth and no cover. The truth, unpackaged, unpolished, the way it actually looks when you stop trying to make it presentable. She mounted her horse. Every system that has ever fallen did not fall because someone brought better arguments. It fell because someone stood up and said the thing that everyone already knew, but no one had the nerve to say out loud. She turned the horse south. Behind her, the dawnbreak settlement stood empty. Ahead, a fortress full of strangers waited for a woman they had never met, carrying a name they had only heard in whispers, holding a satchel full of proof that the empire they lived under had been feeding on them from the inside. Serena rode, and with every mile, the woman she had been, the careful planner, the patient strategist, the Luna who moved in shadows and counted her steps, fell further behind, replaced by something rawer and less refined and more dangerous. Something that did not have time for precision anymore. Something that would have to stand in front of wolves she did not know, in a place she had not chosen, and make them believe that the woman Darius Thorne had discarded was the same woman who could bring his kingdom to its knees. Not with fire, not with armies, but with the one weapon no empire has ever learned to defend against, the voices of the people it forgot to silence. The fortress was not a fortress anymore. It was a skeleton, stone ribs jutting from the hillside, half the roof collapsed into rubble, the walls thick with moss, and the kind of silence that accumulates in places where violence happened long enough ago to become architecture. Arrow slits stared out from the remaining tower like hollow eyes. The courtyard, once designed to hold a garrison, held 47 wolves who had ridden through the night from territories scattered across the southern reaches of a kingdom that had forgotten they existed. Serena dismounted at the gate, her legs nearly buckled. A day and a half of hard riding through frozen terrain had stripped the feeling from her thighs and left her knees liquid. She caught herself on the horse's neck and breathed through it, short, controlled breaths, the kind that keep a body standing when the body has decided it would rather fall. Desta had been right. These were not politicians. They stood in clusters throughout the courtyard, armed with whatever they had, hunting blades, wood-cutting axes, a few proper swords that looked older than their owners. Their faces were drawn tight with the particular tension of people who have committed to something dangerous and are now waiting to find out if it was brave or stupid. The line between those two things, Serena had learned, was drawn entirely by outcome. Brennan was there. She spotted him immediately. The thick build, the split eyebrow, the way he stood slightly apart from the others with his arms folded as if holding himself in. When he saw Serena, something moved across his face. Relief, maybe. Or the look of a man who has lit a fire and is watching to see if the person he lit it for will feed it or stamp it out. He crossed to her. You came. You did not give me a choice. You needed a push. I needed time. You gave me a deadline instead. Serena's voice was raw from the cold and the riding and the sustained pressure of being hunted across two territories. Those letters, Brennan, you sent them without coordination, without verifying the recipients, without consulting, without waiting for permission from a woman who was hiding in a valley while the rest of us rotted. His jaw was tight. The scar through his eyebrow pulsed white. I spent 6 years watching Silver Fang bleed my pack. 6 years keeping my mouth shut and my head down because every alpha who spoke up got crushed. You showed me the proof, and you expected me to sit on it. File it neatly. Wait for the right moment. He leaned closer. There is no right moment. There is only the moment you stop being afraid. And the Black Mirror? Kael has a letter with your name on it. With my name. With Thessa's settlement. Brennan's expression did not change. I know. You know. I know because Kael sent riders to the Ashwood 2 days ago. They arrived after I had already dispersed my people. Lyra's wolves found an empty settlement and cold hearths. He paused. Just like yours. Serena stared at him. The arithmetic was shifting. Not the slow, careful arithmetic of her original plan, but the fast, brutal kind that happens in the field, where variables change by the hour and the calculations are done in blood pressure rather than ink. Where are your people now? Scattered through the eastern forests, safe enough for now. But Lyra will not stop at empty settlements. He gestured at the courtyard. These wolves came because they received my letter and decided that the risk of showing up was smaller than the risk of staying invisible. That is not loyalty, Serena. That is desperation. And desperation has an expiration date. She looked at the gathered wolves. 47. From at least 9 different packs, judging by the variations in clothing and weaponry. Some of them were young. Too young. Faces still carrying the softness of adolescence beneath the dirt and the hard traveling. Some were old, scarred veterans of border conflicts that the Crown had started and abandoned without cleanup. None of them knew each other. None of them had trained together, fought together, or shared so much as a meal. They were strangers bound by a common wound, and common wounds make fragile alliances because the moment the bleeding stops, the only thing left is the memory of pain, and memory is not enough to build on. Serena climbed the broken steps to what had once been the fortress's main platform, a raised stone ledge overlooking the courtyard. The stone was cracked. Weeds grew through the gaps. She stood there and felt the wind come through the ruined walls and push against her like a hand testing whether she would hold. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. 47 wolves in a stone courtyard created an acoustic chamber, and silence carried further than shouting. You do not know me. Some of you have heard a name. Some of you have heard a story. Most of what you have heard is probably wrong, so let me give you the version that is not. She paused, let the silence work. I was the Luna of Silver Fang. For 7 years, I held that title while a woman named Lyra Ashbourne dismantled everything it was supposed to mean. She took my authority. She took my position. She took the ear of the man I was bonded to and filled it with numbers that made her rich and made your packs poor. I know this because I spent 5 months stealing her records, copying them by candlelight, and walking out of the palace with evidence that proves every tariff she doubled, every trade route she choked, every alpha she had reassigned for asking too many questions. She pulled the satchel from across her body and held it up. The leather was stained with sweat and road dust. It looked like nothing. A courier's bag, the kind that carries invoices and routine correspondence. It did not look like something that could collapse an empire. This is not a weapon. It is a mirror. And when I hold it up in front of the Silver Fang court, every wolf in that hall will see what they have been pretending not to see for years. She lowered the satchel. But I cannot do it alone, and I will not lie to you about what it costs. The courtyard was silent. The wind moved through the broken walls. Somewhere in the ruins, a piece of loose stone shifted and fell, the sound echoing off the courtyard floor like a dry cough. A wolf near the back spoke up. He was older, gray at the temples, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. What exactly are you asking us to do? I'm asking you to attend the Empire Ascension ceremony. Every sworn pack sends representatives. Your packs were sworn once, before Silver Fang decided your oaths were worth less than your resources. The ceremony is in 9 days. Every alpha of consequence will be there. Every general, every council member, and Lyra Ashbourne, who has spent the last 7 years building a shadow empire that none of them knew existed. Walk into the Silver Fang Palace, the old wolf said, into the seat of the kingdom that crushed us. Yes. With what army? With the truth, which is the one thing Lyra has never had to defend against because no one in that court has ever been willing to speak it. The silence this time was different, heavier, charged with the friction of fear grinding against anger. She could see it in their faces, the war happening behind their eyes. The desire to act versus the memory of what happened to wolves who acted against the crown. Every one of them had a story. Every one of them had buried someone or lost something or swallowed an injury that still sat in their gut like swallowed glass. 9 days, Brennan said from the courtyard floor. He was speaking to the gathered wolves, not to Serena. In 9 days, the entire Silver Fang leadership will be in one room, performing a ceremony designed to celebrate their own power. They will be surrounded by their guards, their generals, and their certainty, and we are going to walk into that room and take apart that certainty piece by piece. They will kill us, someone said. A young woman near the middle of the crowd, her voice flat with the certainty of experience. Brennan turned to her. They have been killing us for years, slowly, politely. Through tariffs and neglect and the systematic erasure of everything we built, the only difference is that this time, we get to see their faces when they do it. Serena watched Brennan work the crowd. He was not elegant. His words were blunt instruments, hammers, where she would have used scalpels. But they landed. They landed because the wolves in this courtyard did not need precision. They needed permission. Permission to feel what they had been feeling for years. Permission to name it. Permission to act on it instead of swallowing it until it poisoned them from the inside. This was the thing she had not planned for. The thing her 5 months of careful architecture had not accounted for. She had designed a campaign of evidence, methodical, irrefutable, delivered through proper channels to legitimate authorities. Brennan had turned it into a movement, and movements did not follow blueprints. They followed heat. The planning took 3 days. Not the careful, document-driven planning Serena had envisioned, but the rough, practical kind. Logistics, routes, timing, how to move 47 wolves across 2 territories and into the Silver Fang capital without being detected. How to enter a heavily guarded ceremony without invitations, without weapons, without the political standing that would normally grant access. Ronan solved the last problem. The Ascension ceremony uses a processional format, he said. They were in what remained of the fortress's map room, a space with 1 intact wall and 3 that were more suggestion than structure. Each pack enters through the main gate in order of rank, announced by the herald. But the servant entrance on the eastern wing is unmanned during the processional because every guard in the palace is deployed to the Great Hall for the ceremony. You are certain. I designed the security rotation for the last 4 ceremonies. Lyra never bothered to change it because she assumed the only threats came from the front. He traced a line on the rough map Desta had drawn on the stone floor with charcoal. Eastern service corridor to the gallery level. The gallery overlooks the main hall. From there you can address the entire assembly without setting foot on the floor. And when Darius orders the guards to remove us, the guards will need to reach the gallery first. There is 1 staircase. Narrow. Built for servants, not soldiers. 3 wolves at the top of that staircase can hold it for 15 minutes. Longer if they are motivated. Motivated? Serena repeated. Ronan met her eyes. I will hold the staircase. Ronan, I have spent 2 years standing guard over a throne that did not deserve guarding. Let me stand guard over something that does. She held his gaze. His eyes were clear, clearer than she had seen them since the palace, since the uniform, since the long degradation of serving a king who mistook obedience for righteousness. There was no death wish in his expression. There was something simpler and harder, the desire to place his body between something he valued and something that threatened it, and to do so for a reason he had chosen rather than one he had been assigned. She nodded, did not speak. Some agreements are cheapened by words. The 9th day came like a blade. They moved in the dark. 3 groups, 3 routes, converging on the Silver Fang capital from 3 directions. Serena rode with Brennan and 12 wolves from the Ashwood, approaching from the south through the merchant quarter where the crowds were thickest and the guards paid least attention because commerce was beneath their notice. Thessa led a group from the west, having rejoined the coalition 2 days earlier with 8 of her Dawnbreak wolves, the ones young enough to fight and old enough to understand what fighting meant. Desta brought the rest through the eastern forests, timing their arrival to the hour Ronan had specified. The capital was lit for celebration. Torches lined the main avenue. Banners of the sworn packs hung from every building. A display of unity that had always been more performance than reality, but tonight the performance was polished to a high sheen. Music drifted from the palace courtyard. The smell of roasting meat and spiced wine carried on the cold air. The Silver Fang kingdom was celebrating itself, and the celebration was so loud that no one heard the 47 wolves moving through its margins like water through cracks in a dam. They reached the eastern service entrance at the moment the processional began. Through the stone walls, Serena could hear the herald's voice, amplified by the hall's acoustics, announcing each pack in descending order of rank and favor. The Blackmere, the Iron Ridge, the Southern Claw, each name followed by the thunder of approval from the assembled court. Ronan produced a key. Old iron, heavy, the kind of key that opens doors designed to be forgotten. He turned it in the lock without ceremony, and the door swung inward on hinges that had been recently oiled. He had prepared. Even in desertion, even in exile, the soldier in him had prepared. They moved through the service corridor in single file. The corridor was narrow and unlit, the air stale with the smell of old cooking grease and damp stone. Their boots were muffled with cloth wrappings Thessa's wolves had fashioned from torn shirts. The sound of the ceremony grew louder with each step. The herald's voice, the rhythmic pounding of ceremonial staffs, the sustained roar of a court that believed itself invincible. The staircase to the gallery was where Ronan said it would be. He stopped at the base and turned to Serena. His hand closed around her arm, firm, brief, the grip of a man who knows he might not get another chance to touch the person he is about to defend. 15 minutes, he said. Make them count. He took his position at the top of the stairs with 2 wolves from the Ashwood, young men whose names Serena had learned 3 days ago and would never forget. They drew their blades and settled into the narrow space like stones fitted into a wall, shoulder to shoulder, blocking the passage with their bodies. Serena stepped onto the gallery. The great hall opened below her like the inside of a living thing, massive, pulsing with heat and noise, and the compressed energy of 500 wolves packed into a space built for 300. The iron chandeliers blazed. The banners hung motionless in the overheated air. At the far end, on the raised dais, Darius sat on the silver-fanged throne in full ceremonial armor, black iron and silver. The wolf crest embossed across the breastplate. The crown of bound thorns on his head. He looked like a king. He looked like exactly what he believed himself to be. Lyra stood at his right. Her gown was white this time, white and silver, the colors of a luna, worn deliberately, worn as a claim. Her hands were folded in front of her, and her expression was the composed mask of a woman who has arranged every detail of the evening and is watching it perform. Serena gripped the gallery railing. Her knuckles went bloodless. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, in her wrists, in the soft tissue behind her eyes. Below her, 500 wolves who had watched her kneel, who had watched her stripped and diminished and reduced to a ghost in her own kingdom. 500 wolves who had done nothing. She breathed in, tasted the air, smoke and wine and sweat, and the metallic undertone of too many bodies in an enclosed space. Her lungs filled, her spine straightened, and the woman who had spent 7 years being invisible made herself seen. Darius? Her voice cut through the hall like a blade through cloth. Not loud, not shouted, but the acoustics of the gallery were designed to carry a whisper to every corner, because the gallery had been built for queens who needed to observe without descending, and observation requires clarity. The hall went silent. 500 heads turned upward. 500 pairs of eyes found the figure standing at the gallery railing, small against the stone, dark cloaked, holding a leather satchel pressed against her ribs like a second heart. Darius rose from the throne. His face was unreadable. His body was perfectly still in the way that only trained fighters are still. The stillness that precedes violence, the held breath before the strike. Lyra's mask cracked. Not much. A flicker around the eyes, a tightening of the jaw. The micro-expression of a woman whose carefully arranged evening has just developed a variable she did not account for. She turned to the nearest guard and spoke a word Serena could not hear. "I am not here to reclaim my title," Serena said. Her voice held. Barely. The tremor was there, buried under the words like a current beneath ice, but she held it. "I am not here for revenge. I am here because this court has been lied to, and the proof is in my hands, and every wolf in this hall deserves to see it before they pledge another year of loyalty to a throne that has been robbing them blind." The silence deepened. It was the kind of silence that has texture. The compressed air of 500 people holding their breath simultaneously, the almost physical weight of collective attention focused on a single point. "Guards," Lyra said. Her voice was controlled, but the pitch was wrong, half a note higher than her usual register, the frequency of a woman whose composure is being maintained by force rather than nature. Remove her from the gallery. Boots on stone. The guards were moving. Serena heard them. The organized clatter of armored men converging on the gallery staircase, where Ronan stood with his borrowed sword and his two ashwood wolves in a passage barely wide enough for 2 men abreast. The first guard hit the staircase. Steel rang against steel. The sound was sharp and ugly, stripped of any ceremonial grace. The real sound of combat, the sound that happens when metal meets metal with killing intent. Serena opened the satchel. Her hands were shaking. Sweat ran down her temples and pooled in the hollow of her throat. Below her, the hall was erupting. Wolves on their feet, shouting. The guards pushing through the crowd toward the staircase. Lyra's voice cutting through the noise with orders that were growing more frantic by the second. On the dais, Darius had not moved. He stood beside the throne with his hand on its arm, his eyes locked on Serena, and the expression on his face was not anger. It was recognition. The look of a man who has just seen, for the first time, the thing he should have been looking at all along. Serena pulled the first document from the satchel and held it over the gallery railing. Her voice, when it came, was steady. The tremor was gone. The fear was gone. Everything was gone except the words and the proof and the 500 wolves below her who were about to learn that the empire they served had been devouring them from within. This is a record of tariff collections from the Dawnbreak territory, signed by Lyra Ashbourne's personal agent, showing a 40% levy on a pack that was told they owed 25. The difference, 6 years of stolen revenue, was funneled into private accounts that funded Lyra's personal network of, "She is lying," Lyra said. Her voice carried, but it was thin now, stretched taut over something that was beginning to give way underneath. This woman was exiled for treason. She is a disgraced Luna spreading fabrications to... I was never exiled. Serena's voice cut over Lyra's like a hammer over glass. I left. There is a difference. And these documents are not fabrications. They are copies of records kept in your own hand, Lyra. Your handwriting, your seal, your numbers. The hall was splitting. Wolves who had been seated were standing, pressing forward, their faces angled upward toward the gallery with the focused intensity of people who have just realized that the floor beneath them might not be solid. On the staircase Ronan was holding, she could hear the rhythm of the fighting, the controlled percussion of a man who knew how to turn a narrow passage into an advantage. Serena pulled the second document. The third. She held them up and read the numbers. The real numbers. The ones Lyra had hidden behind clean audits and reassigned commissioners, and the systematic silence of anyone who got close enough to see the truth. Trade revenues diverted. Council votes falsified. Border commanders replaced with wolves loyal not to the crown, but to Lyra personally. A shadow government built inside the body of the kingdom like a parasite feeding on its host. The alphas in the hall were looking at each other now, looking at Lyra, looking at Darius. The geometry of the room was changing, allegiances shifting in real time, visible in the way bodies turned, in the way hands moved toward weapons or away from them, in the way the empty space around Lyra widened by inches as the wolves nearest to her stepped back, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the instinctive retreat of animals recognizing a threat they had previously mistaken for a member of the pack. Darius had not spoken. He stood beside the throne like a man carved from the same iron as his armor, his eyes moving between Serena and Lyra with the slow, terrible comprehension of someone watching two realities collide and knowing that only one of them can survive the impact. On the staircase, the fighting stopped. A sudden silence, worse than the noise. Serena's hand tightened on the railing. She could not see the staircase from the gallery. She could not see Ronan. She could hear boots on stone, heavy, ascending, the sound of someone coming up the stairs through the space where Ronan had been standing. The footsteps reached the gallery entrance. Serena turned, and the wolf who stepped through the archway was not a guard. It was Kael, Alpha of the Blackmere, Lyra's ally, the wolf who had intercepted Thessa's messenger. He stood in the archway with blood on his hands and Ronan's sword in his grip, and behind him, filling the staircase, were 12 Blackmere soldiers in full battle armor. Kael looked at Serena, at the satchel, at the documents in her hands. Lyra sends her regards, he said. Below, in the hall, Lyra smiled. And in that smile, Popa, cold, precise, triumphant, Serena saw the shape of everything she had failed to anticipate. Not the betrayal. She had planned for betrayal. But the timing, the surgical precision of it. Lyra had known. Not just about the letters, not just about the coalition. She had known about the servant entrance, the gallery, the staircase. She had known because she had let it happen. Let Serena gather her wolves, let her ride to the fortress, let her walk into the palace and stand on the gallery and begin to speak. Let her taste the moment of triumph before slamming the door shut. Because destroying an enemy is not enough for someone like Lyra. You have to let them hope first. You have to let them believe for one perfect, crystalline second that they have won. And then you show them that the victory was the trap all along. Kael advanced into the gallery. His soldiers spread behind him, filling the space, cutting off every exit. Below, the hall erupted. Shouts, confusion, the crash of overturned benches as the assembled wolves surged in every direction at once. On the dais, Darius stood frozen, his hand still on the throne, his face the face of a man watching his kingdom crack down the middle in real time. Serena backed against the railing. The satchel was in her arms. The documents were in the air. And behind her, nothing but a 30-foot drop to the floor of the Great Hall, where 500 wolves were watching a woman with no army, no weapons, and no way out choose between surrender and a fall that would end everything she had built. Her fingers tightened on the railing. She looked down. She did not jump. She turned. Kael was 10 feet away, Ronan's sword held low at his side, the blade dark with blood that was not his. His soldiers filled the gallery behind him. 12 armored wolves in a space built for servants and observation, their breathing loud and metallic in the enclosed stone. Below, the great hall churned with the sound of 500 wolves caught between spectacle and panic, their voices rising like water against the walls. Serena looked at Kael, at the sword, at the blood on his hands. She felt something in her chest collapse, not her courage, not her resolve, but the last fragile membrane separating who she had been from who she was about to become. Ronan was down. The staircase was lost. The documents in her hands were the only thing standing between this moment and silence was what Lyra had always counted on. "Where is Ronan?" Serena said. "Alive. For now." Kael tilted his head. "Lyra wants you breathing. Dead martyrs are harder to discredit than living disgraces. And you do what Lyra wants. I do what keeps my pack fed. Same as you." He gestured with the sword. "Put the documents down. Walk with us. This ends quietly, and nobody else bleeds tonight." Serena's fingers tightened on the satchel. The leather was slick with her sweat. Her pulse was visible in her throat, a rapid, a rhythmic flutter that she could not control and did not try to. Control was a luxury for people who still had options. She had something else. She had 500 witnesses. She turned back to the railing. "I'm speaking to the hall," she said. Not to Kael, not to his soldiers, to the air itself, to the acoustics that would carry her voice down to every wolf below. Kael lunged, his hand closed on her arm, the grip savage, fingers digging into muscle until the pain registered as heat. She did not pull away. She planted her feet and spoke over his grip, spoke through the pain, spoke with the full force of a voice that had been silenced for 7 years and had finally run out of silence. "The documents are real, every number, every signature, every stolen levy and falsified record, and if I am dragged from this gallery tonight, it changes nothing, because the truth does not need me to carry it anymore. It only needed me to say it once." She threw the satchel. Not down, out, over the railing into the open air of the great hall, where it tumbled end over end and burst open against the stone floor, scattering pages across the ground like leaves torn from a dying tree. Hundreds of documents, tariff records, council minutes, correspondence, ledgers, sliding across the marble into the feet of the assembled alphas, who stare down at them the way you stare at something you have suspected for years but never dared to name. Kael's grip tightened. He yanked her back from the railing. She hit the gallery wall hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. Stars burst behind her eyes. Through them she saw Kael's face, not angry, not triumphant, but afraid. The particular fear of a man who has just realized that the thing he was sent to contain has already escaped. Below, the hall erupted. Not in violence, in something worse. In truth. Wolves were picking up the documents, reading them, passing them. Alpha to alpha, hand to hand, the pages moving through the crowd like blood through a body. Reaching every extremity, carrying information that could not be unlearned, could not be unread, could not be stuffed back into a leather satchel and carried away by a woman with a bruised arm and a broken plan. Darius descended from the dais, he moved through the crowd, and the crowd parted. Not in deference this time, but in the instinctive way that bodies move away from something falling. He reached the center of the hall where the documents lay scattered. He picked up a page. Read it. His face did not change, his hands did not tremble, but something behind his eyes shifted. A tectonic movement, deep and slow, the kind that precedes the collapse of structures that took generations to build. He picked up another page, and another. The hall was watching him. 500 wolves watching their king read the proof of his own blindness, page by page, in the center of a ceremony designed to celebrate his power. The silence was excruciating, the silence of a kingdom holding its breath while the man who ruled it learned, document by document, that the woman he had trusted above all others had been feeding on the kingdom's marrow. Lyra moved. She stepped down from the dais with the precise, measured steps of a woman who still believed she could manage this, could contain the damage, redirect the narrative, apply the right pressure to the right joints, and make the machine function again. She crossed to Darius and placed her hand on his arm. "These are forgeries," she said. Her voice was steady, professional. The voice of a woman who had built a career on making lies sound like reason. "Serena has been planning this since she left. She fabricated. This is your seal." Darius's voice was low, dangerously low, the timbre of a man who is holding something inside himself that, if released, would level the room. He held up a page. "This is your seal, Lyra. Your handwriting. Your cipher for the private accounts. I know your cipher because you used it in your correspondence with me." Lyra's hand fell from his arm. Can you explain why 11 packs were levied at double the rate I authorized? Can you explain why the revenue discrepancy matches the exact funding of a network of wolves who answer to you and not to me?" He turned to face her. The full weight of his body, his armor, his authority, all of it focused on the woman who stood before him in a white gown and a crumbling mask. "Can you explain why the commander of my own guard is bleeding on a staircase because a wolf you sent decided that silencing my Luna was more important than the truth?" My Luna. He said it without thinking. The words fell out of him like something that had been lodged too deep to extract deliberately, a splinter working its way to the surface years after the wound that planted it. Lyra's composure broke. Not dramatically, she was too practiced for spectacle. It broke the way ice breaks on a river in early spring, hairline fractures spreading from a central point until the surface that looked solid moments ago reveals itself as 1,000 separate pieces held together by nothing but tension. Her eyes moved across the hall, scanning for allies, for exits, for the familiar landmarks of a landscape she had controlled for years and was now watching rearrange itself around her. She found none. The Alphas were reading the documents, every one of them, passing them, comparing numbers, matching figures against their own memories of levies paid, and resources surrendered and requests denied. The math was doing what math always does when it is finally laid bare. It was telling a story that no amount of rhetoric could rewrite. "Arrest her," Darius said. 2 words. Spoken flatly, without drama, without the thundering authority he usually deployed for public pronouncements. He said them the way a man says something he should have said years ago and knows it, with the quiet shame of delayed action. The guards moved. Not the Black Mirror soldiers on the gallery. They had gone still, frozen in the particular paralysis of men who have just discovered they backed the wrong side. But the king's guard, the palace regulars, wolves in silver fang armor, who had been trained to follow the voice of their king regardless of personal opinion. They flanked Lyra. She did not resist. She did not speak. She stood between them with her chin raised and her eyes fixed on Darius. And in those eyes was not defeat, but calculation. The relentless, tireless arithmetic of a mind that was already planning its next move even as the current one collapsed. They led her out through the main doors. The hall watched her go with the silent intensity of an audience that has just witnessed the final act of something they did not know was a performance. On the gallery, Kael released Serena's arm. He stepped back, laid Ronan's sword on the stone floor, raised his hands, palms out, the rogue sign for surrender. The same gesture Desta had made at the dawnbreak perimeter, the universal language of wolves who know when the current has shifted and are smart enough to stop swimming against it. Serena did not look at him. She was already moving, shunned, down the gallery, through the archway, down the staircase where Ronan lay slumped against the wall with a gash across his ribs and his eyes open. The two Ashwood wolves were beside him, battered but breathing. One of them had a broken arm held against his chest. The other had blood in his teeth and a look on his face that suggested the blood was not his. Ronan. Serena knelt beside him. Her hands found the wound. Deep but not fatal, the cut angled across muscle rather than through it. A fighter's wound. The kind you give someone you want stopped, not killed. 15 minutes, Ronan said. His voice was rough, scraped raw. I said 15 minutes. I gave you 12. You gave me enough. He closed his eyes. Not unconscious, just finished. The way a runner stops after a race, the body surrendering to the gravity it has been defying through pure will. Serena pressed her palm against the wound and held it there, feeling his blood move between her fingers, hot and real, and evidence that something she cared about had survived. The hours that followed were long and strange, and marked by the slow, grinding machinery of institutional collapse. The Alphas convened in the Great Hall, not as an assembly of sworn packs, but as something new, something that did not have a name yet because it had never existed before. A gathering of wolves who had spent years inside a system and were now standing in the wreckage of it, looking at each other with the bewildered clarity of people who have just been told that the house they lived in was built on a fault line. Darius did not lead the convocation. He sat in the hall, but not on the throne. He sat on a bench near the wall, in the space where minor delegates usually sat, his ceremonial armor still on but the crown removed, placed on the bench beside him like something he had set down and did not intend to pick up again. His hands were clasped between his knees. He stared at the floor. The Alphas talked, argued, shouted, fell silent, talked again. The documents circulated endlessly, passed, read, disputed, verified against pack records that other Alphas had brought to the ceremony. The numbers held. They held because lies require maintenance and truth requires only exposure. And Lyra's numbers, meticulously kept for 7 years, were the most damning kind of evidence, the kind the accused created themselves. By midnight, 3 things had been decided. Lyra Ashbourne would be exiled to the Outer Territories, stripped of all titles, all property, all claims. Her network, the private army of wolves who had served her shadow government, would be disbanded, its members given the choice between integration into legitimate pack structures or exile. And the Silver Fang Kingdom would be reorganized under a council of united packs, each with an equal vote, ending the centralized rule that had allowed one alpha to hold unchecked authority over a kingdom that was supposed to belong to all of them. Serena was present for the deliberations. She spoke when asked. She clarified the documents when their contents required interpretation. She did not advocate for herself. She did not claim authority. She sat at the table like what she was, a woman who had done the work and was now watching other people decide what to build on the foundation she had laid. It was Thessa who nominated her. High Luna, Thessa said. The room went quiet. Not a queen, not a ruler. A voice for the council. Someone who speaks for the wolves who have been spoken over. She looked at Serena across the table with those river stone eyes. Someone who has already proven she will carry the weight. The vote was not unanimous. It did not need to be. 23 of 31 alphas raised their hands. Brennan raised his first. Desta, who was not an alpha but had been granted a voice by the Thornfield remnant wolves, who had no one else to send, raised hers last. Serena accepted, not with a speech, not with ceremony. She stood, and she nodded, and she said, I will try to be worth it. It was the simplest thing she had ever said. It was also the most honest. Darius found her on the battlements at dawn. The ceremony wreckage was being cleared below. Overturned benches righted, scattered documents gathered, the debris of an empire's worst night swept into piles by wolves who would spend months sorting through what was worth keeping and what needed to be burned. He stood beside her. Not close. An arm's length of stone between them, the space populated by 7 years of things neither of them had said. I did not see it, he said. His voice was stripped bare. No authority in it. No command. just the raw, grated sound of a man who has been confronted with his own wreckage and lacks the architecture to rebuild around it. I did not see what she was doing. You chose not to see. That is different. Is it? Yes. Blindness is a condition. Choosing to look away is a practice. Serena kept her eyes on the horizon. The sky was turning, gray to gold, the slow alchemy of dawn transforming the valley below from shadow into substance. You practiced it every day. Every time I brought you evidence. Every time I asked you to listen. Every time you told me not to make everything a battle. He was quiet for a long time. The wind moved across the battlements and carried the sound of the kingdom waking, doors opening, voices rising, the tentative stirring of a body that has survived a fever and is testing whether its limbs still work. I want to ask you to stay, he said, not as my Luna, not as my mate, just stay. Help me understand what I allowed to happen. Help me see the shape of it. Serena turned to him. She looked at his face, the face she had loved, the face she had memorized in the dark on nights when memorizing was the only intimacy left to her. The lines were deeper now, the jaw less certain. The eyes, which had once held the focused intensity of a man who believed he could will the world into the shape he wanted, now held something else, something quieter, something that looked like the first faltering awareness that willing was not the same as deserving. She felt it, the pull, the old gravity, the deep body memory of his hands on her face, of the way he used to say her name like it was the answer to a question he had not yet learned to ask. The pull was real. It lived in her muscles, her bones, the cellular memory of a bond that had been formed in a time when she still believed that love was a structure you could live inside rather than a weather pattern you survived. You do not need me to see the shape of it, she said. You need to sit in the wreckage without someone to explain it to you. You need to feel the weight of every decision you delegated and every question you refused to ask, and every time you chose comfort over truth. She paused. That is not punishment, Darius. That is how people learn who they actually are, by sitting with the version of themselves they spent years avoiding. His hand moved toward her, stopped, fell back to his side. The gesture of a man who has reached for something and realized, mid-reach, that the reaching is the problem. Will I see you again? You will see the High Luna, at council sessions, at pact negotiations, in the work of rebuilding the thing your neglect nearly destroyed. She held his eyes. But you will not see the woman who loved you. She is not here anymore. She left the night she walked out of this palace, and she is not coming back. He lowered his head. Not a bow, not submission. The involuntary downward movement of a man absorbing a blow he knows he earned. Serena left him on the battlements. She walked down the stone stairs to the courtyard where Marin was waiting. Marin, who had reached the Ashwood in time, who had ridden back through the night, who was standing in the morning light with her arms folded and her sharp face carrying the particular expression of a woman who has watched someone she follows walk through fire and come out the other side as something the fire could not touch. The council meets at noon, Marin said. I know. Thessa wants to discuss trade route restoration. Brennan is pushing for immediate restructuring of the tariff system, and there are 14 pacts requesting formal admission to the coalition. I know. Marin studied her. You did not sleep. I will sleep when the work allows it. The work will never allow it. That is why you have to take it. Serena almost smiled. Almost. The expression reached her eyes, but not her mouth. The smile of a woman who has learned to carry joy and grief in the same hand without confusing them. She walked through the courtyard, past the guards who straightened as she passed, not the rigid posture of fear, but the attentive shift of wolves recognizing someone they had chosen to follow, rather than someone they had been ordered to obey. Past the main hall where the documents were being cataloged by a team of scribes Brennan had assembled from 3 different packs. Past the staircase where Ronan had held, now cleaned of blood, the stone showing no evidence of what it had cost except a single gash in the wall where a blade had bitten deep. She found Ronan in the infirmary. His wound had been stitched by a dawnbreak healer. Clean work, tight sutures, the kind of repair that leaves a scar, but not a weakness. He was sitting upright on the edge of the cot, shirtless, the bandage wrapped across his ribs like a second skin. He looked tired. He looked whole. The 2 things, Serena was learning, were not mutually exclusive. High Luna, he said, testing the title, rolling it around in his mouth like something he was not sure about yet. Ronan, you threw the documents. I threw the documents. That was not the plan. The plan died on the staircase. I improvised. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a rough, broken sound, Tete. The laugh of a man whose ribs were stitched and whose body hurt, and who was laughing anyway because the alternative was a gravity he could not afford. You threw 5 months of work off a balcony. I threw 5 months of work into 500 pairs of hands. There is a difference. You keep saying that. There is a difference. There is a difference. He shook his head. One day, the difference will be obvious, and you will stop having to explain it. That day is not today. She stood at the infirmary window and looked out at the kingdom. The Silver Fang capital spread below her in the morning light, the same towers, the same walls, the same river cutting its dark ribbon through the valley. But the banners were being taken down. Not torn, not burned, lowered, carefully, folded, stored. They would be replaced, not with one kingdom's banner, but with many. The visual grammar of a new structure, a shared authority, a power distributed rather than concentrated. It would take months, years maybe. The kind of work that does not announce itself with ceremonies or speeches, but grinds forward in committee rooms and trade negotiations, and the slow, unglamorous labor of building systems that are harder to corrupt because they were designed by people who knew what corruption looked like from the inside. Serena knew this. She knew the scale of what she had committed to, and she knew that commitment was not the same as completion, and she knew that the hardest part of any revolution is not the burning down but the building up. But standing there in the light of a morning that had followed the longest night of her life, she felt something she had not felt in 7 years. Not triumph. Triumph was a spike, sharp, bright, temporary. This was something lower, deeper, built into the bedrock of her body rather than spiking through the surface. It was the feeling of standing in a place she had earned, not because someone had given it to her, not because a bond mark on her shoulder entitled her to it, not because a throne or a title or a man's approval had validated her existence, but because she had looked at the worst version of her life, the version where she was kneeling on cold marble while a woman who stole everything told her to bow lower. And she had decided that the woman on her knees was not the end of the story. She had decided that she was the author, and authors do not kneel. Months later, when the council had settled into its rhythms and the trade routes had reopened and the packs that had been starved were beginning to heal, Serena would stand before the full assembly and deliver her first formal address as High Luna. She would speak about the kingdom they were building, not as a replacement for what had fallen, but as an evolution of it. She would speak about the cost, about the wolves who had bled for this, who had ridden through the dark, who had held staircases and carried letters, and stood in courtyards full of strangers and decided that standing was worth the risk of falling. She would speak about Darius, who had stepped down from the throne and disappeared from public life, carrying a weight that no one could carry for him. She would speak about forgiveness, not as absolution, but as release, the decision to stop carrying someone else's debt and use those hands for something better. But that was months away. Today, in the infirmary, with Ronan's rough laughter still hanging in the air, and Marin's footsteps approaching in the corridor, and the sounds of a kingdom remaking itself drifting through the window, Serena Vale stood in the light and breathed. Just breathed. And the breath tasted like morning, like cold stone and pine smoke and the iron edge of a winter that was, finally, beginning to end. It tasted like the space between what she had survived and what she intended to build. It tasted like the first breath of a woman who had stopped being defined by what was taken from her, and had started being defined by what she created from the wreckage. Outside, the kingdom stirred. Wolves moved through the courtyards, carrying lumber and ledgers and the raw materials of reconstruction. Somewhere, a bell rang. Not an alarm, not a warning, but a summons to work, to the daily labor of proving that the new thing was better than the old. The sound carried across the valley and echoed off the mountains and faded into a silence that was, for the first time in 7 years, not empty. It was full. Full of the voices of wolves who had learned to speak again. Full of the weight of a truth that had been carried too long by one woman and was now distributed across 100 shoulders. Full of the sound of doors opening in a palace where, for 7 years, the only doors that mattered had been closed. Serena turned from the window. walked toward the corridor, toward the council chamber, toward the work that would not end today or tomorrow or for years to come. But that was hers, chosen, earned, and held with hands that would never again fold in submission. She did not look back at the battlements where Darius had stood. She did not need to. The woman who needed to look back had knelt on cold marble in a great hall a lifetime ago and lowered her head one final time. That woman was gone, and the woman who walked forward now, scarred, tired, unfinished, and unbroken, carried nothing from that hall except the knowledge that the last bow is only the last bow if you decide to stand up. Serena stood up, and the kingdom she built from the ashes stood with her.